Welcome to Lecture 14, Foreign Policy of Nigeria. For this lecture, we shall examine the formation and conduct of foreign policy in Nigeria, objectives. At the end of the lecture, you should be able to describe the importance of Nigeria on the African continent. Explain Nigeria's foreign policy. Foreign policy of Nigeria. Nigeria is a country in West Africa and the most populous country in Africa, with a population of about 150 million. Nigeria shares land borders with the Republic of Benin in the west, Chad and Cameroon in the east, Niger in the north, and borders of Gulf of Guinea in the south. Since 1991, its capital has been the centrally located city of Abuja, but previously the capital was Lagos. Nigeria is one of the most important countries on the African continent. It is one of the most visible African states in the international community and is often referred to as Giant of Africa because of the apparent big brother role the country plays in ensuring the well-being of her immediate neighbors and by extension, Africa as a whole. Additionally, Nigeria plays a pivotal role in the maintenance and promotion of peace in Africa, as well as in other parts of the world. Foreign policy of Nigeria. On October 1, 1960, Nigeria gained its independence from the United Kingdom after decades of colonial rule, and at present consists of 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. Nigeria re-achieved democracy in 1999 after a 16-year interruption from 1966 until 1999. Nigeria had been ruled except the short-lived Second Republic 1979 to 1983 by military dictators who seized power in coup d'etat and counter-coups during the Nigerian military juntas of 1966 to 1979 and 1983 to 1998. The various regimes and leadership styles experienced by the country invariably shaped our foreign policy. From 1960 to date, Nigeria has maintained a relatively consistent foreign policy, considering the fact that the country had experienced varied forms of government within this period. Right from independence, Africa was a centerpiece of the country's foreign policy, with emphasis on the emancipation, development, and the unity of Africans, both within and outside the continent. Nigeria's foreign policy is guided by certain underlying principles, which from regime to regime has served as a basis for the continuity that strikingly characterize the various relations of Nigeria within the rest of the world. The objectives and principles of Nigeria's foreign policy were specifically laid out in Section 19 of the 1999 Constitution. These are promotion and protection of national interests, promotion of African integration and support for African unity, promotion of international cooperation for the consolidation of universal peace and mutual respect among all nations, and elimination of discrimination in all its manifestations, respect for international law and treaty obligations, as well as the seeking of settlement of international disputes by negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and adjudication, and promotion of a just world economic order. Nigeria has been in the forefront in the establishment and sustaining of various continental and regional organizations. For instance, Organization of African Unity (OAU), established on May 25, 1963, was primarily aimed at achieving two important objectives, namely, to ensure the quick decolonization of the remaining colonies in Africa, and secondly, to facilitate the rapid socio-economic growth and development of the African states. In this respect, Nigeria did a lot in ensuring the implementation of the primary objectives upon which OAU was founded. For instance, in 1975, Nigeria granted the sum of 13.5 million naira and military assistance to Angola's MPLA, and also enlisted diplomatic support to the Angolan government within the OAU. This had greatly accorded recognition to the Angolan government by many African states who were either unwilling to give such recognition. In addition to this, Nigeria contributed enormously to several liberation movements in the continent. This greatly contributed towards the political independence of most African countries. For instance, on February 13, 1976, Nigeria donated the sum of $2 million to South Africa's ANC and $500,000 to Namibia's SWAPO. SWAPO was later granted permission to open office in Lagos. At about the same time, the Federal Ministry of Information inaugurated a committee for dissemination of information about the evils of apartheid. Nigeria plays active roles in various international organizations and vied for positions in them. For example, Joseph Garba, Nigeria's former permanent representative to the UN, was elected in 1989 to a one-year term as President of the UN General Assembly. Adebayo Adedeji was Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, a UN affiliate, and Emeka Anyaoku became Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations in 1989. Former military head of state Olusegun Obasanjo also had become a recognized world statesman and spokesman on African issues. Nigeria contributed personnel to many UN peacekeeping missions, including operations in Congo, Tanzania, and the UN India-Pakistan Observer Mission in the 1960s, the UN Interim Force in Lebanon in 1978, and UN forces observing the Iran-Iraq ceasefire, Angola-Namibian Accords in 1988. The importance that Nigeria places on international organizations grew out of its striving for peace and international cooperation. In the cases of the African Union, formerly Organization of African Unity (OAU), and the Economic Community of West African States (ECOWAS), these organizations also serve to increase African unity. Another important Nigerian goal. Nigeria played an initiating role in the creation of both organizations and was active in both thereafter. Although Nigeria's position on various issues have changed over the years, its level of activity in international organizations has increased. Nigeria has played an important role in international peacekeeping both under the auspices of the United Nations as well as ECOMOG, the Economic Community of West African States Ceasefire Monitoring Group. Nigeria's commitment towards solving African problems could also be seen in various peace and mediation talks she hosted. This include hosting of mediation talks between Sudanese government and Darfurian rebel factions. She also mediated severally between various rebel factions in the Liberian crisis and eventually granted asylum to the former Liberian president, Charles Taylor, in order to end crisis in that country. Further to this, the restoration to power of the president of Sao Tome and Mr. Frederick Menezes after military takeover in July 2003 was largely credited to Nigeria under the leadership of President Obasanjo. In the same vein, Nigeria succeeded in ensuring that due constitutional process was followed in installing democratically elected government in Togo after the death of President Nazingbe Eyadema in February 2005. Nigeria has championed the formulation of development frameworks in the bid to make Africa overcome her economic predicament. Some of the landmark strategies frameworks include the following: the Lagos Plan of Action for Economic Development for Africa, 1980 to 2000, Africa Priority Program for Economic Recovery, APA, 1986 to 1990. This was later converted to the United Nations Program of Actions for Africa's Economic Recovery and Development, UNPAAERD, 1986. The African Alternative Framework to Structural Adjustment for Socio-Economic Recovery and Transformation, AAFSAP, 1986. The African Chapter for Popular Participation for Development, 1990. The United Nations New Agenda for the Development of Africa, UNN-NADAF, 1991. The No Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, 1901. President Obasanjo's tenure, 1999 to 2007, was marked by a number of foreign policy successes, including a significant debt relief concession from the Paris Club that wipes out about $30 billion of Nigeria's $37 billion external debt. Nigeria has also made substantial contributions to multilateral efforts, including international peacekeeping and the Group of 77, which it chaired in 2000. In bilateral relations, Nigeria has forged increasingly significant commercial and diplomatic ties with the emerging global powers of China and India in recent years. And while Obasanjo used his country's considerable capacity for political persuasion to help forge an anti-terrorism consensus in Africa, which the United States had sought, Nigeria also opposed the American-led invasion of Iraq, in part due to the sensitivities of the Muslim populations in northern Nigeria. Since 2005, Nigeria has been a partner in the U.S. State Department-funded Trans-Sahara Counterterrorism Initiative, TSCTI, which operates with support from the Department of Defense's Operation Enduring Freedom, Trans-Sahara, OEFTS, bringing together Algeria, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Morocco, Senegal, and Tunisia, with the goal of helping participating nations to plan and execute command, control and communication system in support of future combined humanitarian, peacekeeping and disaster relief operations. The training was to ensure all nations continue developing their partnerships while further enhancing their capabilities to halt the flow of illicit weapons, goods and human trafficking in the region and prevent terrorists from establishing sanctuary in remote areas. Funding for TSCTI has increased steadily from $16 million in 2005 to $30 million in 2006, with plans for up to $100 million a year until 2011. Nigeria's involvement in the TSCTI, especially when considered in the context of the Counter-Terrorism Cooperation Agreement which Algeria, Chad and Niger, which it had signed in July 2003, is especially significant because it represents the first tentative steps that Nigeria has ever taken towards any sort of permanent alliance. Summary 1. Nigeria is one of the most important countries on the African continent. 2. From independence till date, Nigeria has maintained a relatively consistent foreign policy, considering the fact that the country had experienced varied forms of government within this period. Nigeria has contributed immensely to the development of the African continent. The country has also contributed to the maintenance of peace on the continent. Nigeria has played an important role in international peacekeeping, both under the auspices of the United Nations (UN) as well as ECOMOG, the Economic Community of West African States Ceasefire Monitoring Group. End of Lecture 14. Thanks for listening.